This is our second tape rolling. I'm Galactic storyteller, helping us redefine reality by decoding illusion. And what illusion is that? The holographic matrix of this world. Today we have a very special guest with us, Ms. Kristy Allen. I am going to be introducing us to her in just a moment. She is an MKULTRA survivor, also SRA, and that includes under the hierarchy of the Mormon Church. And she is going to be giving us her very special testimony. Ooh, I have chills right now because I have talked with Kristy several times. She has become a very dear friend to me, and we are actually from the same soul sister spirit group. So I am super excited to have her with us today. Now, when I do podcasts of sort, I do expect my audience to come to the table with a certain amount of education and knowledge. I always provide resources so that you guys can continue your own research on your own. Today's topic is MKULTRA, in particular Operation Paperclip, which was brought into the United States directly after World War II in 1945. This included Nazi scientists that were embedded into the NASA program, also into our different universities, the medical system, and one of the things that they were really excellent at was mind control. This is where we get MK, mind control, control being German for control. That's how they spell it. So in this particular mind control, it's very different than soft mind control, which is what you're going to see with subliminals, product placement, suggestions in television, music, movies, things of that nature. The trauma base is much more serious. Now we're talking emotional, physical, sexual abuse and torture, physical and sexual torture of children that are not yet born. So they're being tortured in the womb, and children that are being tortured from a very early age. So I am going to give you viewers a warning right now that as we go through some of this information and Kristy gets into her story, she is going to be going over some information that could potentially cause triggers for any of you that may have been through a trauma-based mind control situation. So that is our disclaimer here. We did do this recording, this interview once before. So this is our second take. And the reason for it is the dark forces do not like it when the truth is being brought to the forefront. And so although the interview went really well, we had technical issues. And the first 6-7 minutes of the interview was completely gone. It just disappeared magically. And then from what my husband and I were able to recover, we had sound issues. So we have corrected that with this bad boy right here. There's no way we're losing audio today. And we have the incredible spirit of a massive truth seeker, Kristy, who is here to share our story with us, not because it's easy, not because she loves the drama, but because she is passionate about the truth and helping these little children. So I want to welcome my very special guest, Kristy. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good.
It's great to see you. I've loved our conversations, and it's been such a privilege to get to know you.
Good, and me too. You just recently got back from London where you were a keynote speaker for the International Tribunal of Natural Justice headed by Sasha Stone. And there was a seating, a panel of international dignitaries of sorts, including U.S. Former CIA intelligence officer Robert David Steele. How was that experience for you?
Oh, it was absolutely mind-blowing, and it was, I felt very humbled to be asked to go. And the way it all happened was quite amazing, and what led up to it was quite a story, if you want to hear that. Before
I do.
I want to say, in our previous interview, we had talked about how truth goes through stages, and you wanted me to talk about the Arthur Schopenhauer, and I didn't quite have that out that tip of my tongue, but I know
I threw it at you
down now. And it says that all truth passes through 3 stages. And this is for the listener. I want you to really consider this. First, it is ridiculed. And stuff that sounds like this, it is actually designed to sound like it's crazy. So that anyone who starts to talk about it is labeled crazy. Now, this is insult to injury because these people have already been victimized enough so that when they finally have courage to speak their truth, it's really sad that people feel like they have to ridicule it. But that is one of the stages that all truth passes.
Right. So you don't have credibility.
Right. The second is that it is violently opposed. And I have seen the trolls, as you have too, Madeline, people who are really, this kind of truth is very inconvenient because people have built their world around, this not happening, humanity not being enslaved. There is nobody out there that has been ruling and reigning for thousands of years, using these kinds of terrorized methods and splitting us apart, even from ourselves. But unfortunately, that is true. And
even for the United States.
Yeah. Or even for my church, that may be happening out there, but not with my church, because I have the only true church. And God wouldn't allow it to happen to me, and yet he is supposedly a respecter of persons. So it takes time for the dendrites to be created, for people to even take a look at this. But the third thing is it is accepted as self-evident. And what I see as people wake up is, oh, well, of course. Well, I always knew that. Didn't you know that? Well, I knew that. And so they can see it is self-evident. It has always been self-evident. But these are the stages that truth passes through. So anyway, going back to Sasha Stone, he was a rock star in England. And a lot of people don't know that. The way he told it to me, he says, one day I just knew everything about music and I could sing and play my piano and guitar and I just knew music. And he just went, he just had this amazing career. And one day he woke up and said, this isn't what I want to do with my life. And he was dedicated to protecting children and to getting the truth out there about the enslavement of humanity. And he has, he infiltrated, he used the word infiltrated, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
He infiltrated the, what do they call it? Where in New York, where all the countries meet.
The UN?
The UN, hello, sorry.
That's okay.
And the UN, he got to meet all of these amazing leaders and talk to them one-on-one and said, what are you doing about this? Are you a part of the problem, or, are you going to step up? And this is people, did the same thing with the CIA. He did the same thing with his musician friends and actors and just a whole plethora of people. And out of that came this seating, all of these judges from all over the world, people who are on board with him to get this out to the world, to tell the world the truth. And as the light's coming and peeking over the galactic plane and it's hitting the sun and it's reflecting back to us, this truth is now going to hit us whether we're ready or not. If we've been looking at this for 20 and 30 years, that'll be really great. But if it's hitting you all at once and you're going to suddenly be needing those dendrites, it might just fry your circuits. So just be prepared for a detox, because this is difficult on your system to get this all at once. It hits you and you go, I can't, I want to ridicule this, but I can't, because I actually have seen so many of these testimonies. And if it was just one or two, but like me in my case, I had to see 50 testimonies before I really could believe my sister April, because her stories were so crazy. I didn't want to look at what she was saying. And my sister Dawn, but then I saw Kathy O'Brien. She said she remembered my family. She remembered the Osmond family, that we were part of the MKULTRA.
That's overwhelming.
I had no choice but to believe it.
Let's go back, because you did mention a couple of times about the dendrites. So let's just handle the physiology real quick so people have a really good understanding of where this concept of, it literally blew my mind. when I heard information, because that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
We have a need to hear things 3 times in repetition before we tend to accept certain ideas, ideologies, because what's happening in a neurological way is these vibrations are going through the neural pathways and they're creating new ones. So when we hear something that's completely just like out there, it literally does blow your mind in the fact that there are new circuitries that are needing to be created neurologically, new pathways. And so as that happens 2 or 3 times, then we settle into the information, and it's almost at that point that we can consider those ideas, because now the shock is over. So viewers, I would encourage you, if you need to listen to this information 2, 3 times, please do that, because it just may take that in order for this information to really sink in. Okay, so
Very, very well said.
let's talk a little bit about your family background and where you come from, which is ironically where I come from.
Yeah, from a little bitty town in Arizona, the same town that you grew up in. It's very, very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom and dad were managing what was not yet known yet as a C store, a convenience store. That's what they were doing. Lots of ice cream and freezers. My mom was eating a lot of ice cream, and she said she delivered a fat baby, which was me, because of the ice cream.
And you're not.
Well, I'm not. I've never been fat, but I was when I was a baby, apparently. But yeah, my dad, his story is so interesting. He has my poor mother and father. I could see why they were absolutely perfect candidates for this MKUltra. First of all, they came from the Colonia Juarez, Colonia Dublin, Mexico area.
Mm-hmm.
That's where a lot of the Mormons left when they wanted to practice polygamy, because they were already in these relationships. So you couldn't just, cut off a wife here and cut off a husband there. They ended up moving and migrating out of Utah to Colonia Juarez, where it was safe to practice polygamy.
And thus begins the colonizations.
That's correct. And what's interesting as I was doing my research was that Colonia Juarez and Dublin were used in the Operation Paperclip to funnel in these Nazi German scientists. It was just another place that they did that.
Because it's easy not to have birth certificates, and these children aren't registered with the state. So if they disappear, who cares and who knows?
I guess. But it is interesting that the Romneys were there several generations back, Mitt Romney's family, my family. So if you've heard Kathy O'Brien's testimony, she mentions Mitt Romney and the things that they had to go through together as presidential models to show the loyalty or their aptitude or whatever it was that she went through with Mitt Romney. And it is interesting, the New York Times came out about Mitt Romney's family and how they were being used through Bain Capital and all of that to run their drug trafficking and money laundering and that kind of thing. So that's why he wasn't, made the next president. A lot of people don't do their research. They don't know these things, but you just have to go to the New York Times on that one. Anyway, back to Sasha Stone. I did want to say that when he called me from England, I was just going to be a tech person. I had signed up and I was so excited to be accepted and be going to London as a tech person. And I happened to mention why I was so thrilled about this. This was early on in May. And it was so exciting. And he got on the phone with me and he says, "Darling, after talking to you for a few minutes, I am getting a spiritual, feeling to tell you that I do not want you to come to London." And I was just so sad immediately. And he waited that little second. And then he said, "As a tech person, what I would like you to do is to present your testimony of what happened in your family."
Yeah.
And yeah, me too. I was just floored. And plus I had a premonition that is exactly the way it was going to go down, but I didn't assume that it would. I was maybe at the very back of my mind hoping, thinking, wouldn't that be just interesting if I was asked to prepare. It did take a month of preparation, and I did little else as I basically wrote a book about what happened. And in retrospect, I was just putting this piece and that piece and putting all the pieces together. And I hit the floor several times. You talk about having my own mind blown. And one of the biggest things that hit me was I had to finally accept the very real possibility that Dr. Greenhog was Dr. Joseph Mengele, some people, I don't know how to say his name, but it became very obvious to me as I was doing my research that that's who it was. And
your main programmer.
Yes, the main programmer. When we were children living in Arizona, there was a white house just right out of Encanto Park, a white little humble home. We would roll down the hill as we were waiting for our other brothers and sisters to see Dr. Greenhog. And he would, after doing whatever they did, I remember tears, he would give us candy,
Trauma bonding.
Yeah, we got the candy. And the more that I researched and looked at his face and aged, him forward, I'm pretty sure it was him. So this is one of the things that I asked the seating to please research and do, to find out if he was living near Encanto Park. And all of the things I put out, I asked them to please, do some research on a Dr. Greenhog. That's what he went with us. Now, the thing for the viewers, Dr. Mengele used to always love to use something with the word green in them. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Corey Hammond from Salt Lake City did a lot of research into this mind control and did find and unearth that. If you'd like to go to the Green Bomb speech, Greenbaum speech, you will learn a lot about what my family went through at the hands of Mengele.
I recently found out, I was listening to a YouTube from William Schneblin, who was a high druidic wizard. He spent time in Mormonism. He's got also a Freemason, and we're talking like 99th degree, really high up there. So, and he's since left a couple of decades ago, but he's been very open about the information that he's learned from all of these three organizations and drawing the connections there. And one thing that I learned from the book that I read from him is that green is the color of Lucifer, and which I didn't know. And I
didn't know that either.
Yeah, and we're wearing green aprons that signify the pigs in the temple. But Dr. Mengele also went by many pseudonyms with the name Green in them, and then his victims that he would program, they oftentimes referred to him as Beautiful Joseph. Because they needed that trauma bonding. That's that Stockholm. You love your abuser, which is why I would imagine he gave you candy.
Yes, and this is why they have the satanic families that they split apart. And then you have the very person that you're supposed to trust the very most in the world, which would be your mother or your father. And then they end up doing the trauma to you, which splits you apart. You have no other choice but to dissociate. And it's kind of the brain's way of, it's a kind way for you to handle something so incomprehensible to your spirit that it will give you like I think of it as a runoff from a flood, because it's just too much.
Right.
And this other personality will then handle what has just happened. And we hear stories about victims that have been split off so many different ways, from here to Sunday. And they use these people as their mind control robots so that they can run the drugs, do gun smuggling, do kiddie porn distribution, and anything else that makes money for them and brings them power. And the whole money magic system, I don't know if you are familiar with that, Madeline.
Yep,
what the banks are based on. that system through the Khazarian mafia, going back thousands of years, Attila the Hun, this very small family of bankers basically who've been ruling and reigning with blood and horror on the earth.
Shall we name the Rothschilds?
Shall we say it out loud? Yeah. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. I understood that the children of the Rockefellers are trying to break away. I don't know if that's true, but we can certainly name the Rothschilds. These elite bloodline families are really not interested in anybody else that isn't their bloodline. Now, they claim Jewish, but after 600 plus countries they were kicked out of for basically doing these very heinous rituals that included stealing people's kids and doing things that are unspeakable to the children so that they could steal their power. Now, it's not, the scriptures call it borrowed light, that they borrow the light, but it's not borrowing the light, it's stealing the light of the innocence of the most powerful light there is, which is children.
Right.
And they kill them, and they terrorize them right before they kill them. And then what goes into their blood from their adrenals is this adrenochrome. And this is what we call the Kool-Aid that they drink, which supposedly, and there's been a lot of scientific evidence, which I did when I did my research, which is, oh, so sad. I wish I didn't have to look at things like that, but there it is.
This is the myth of the vampire drinking blood. This is where it comes from.
Right.
And why they need the life force and the energy and the youthfulness, why they say that vampires don't age, because it
extends their life.
Right, by the adrenochrome. And your dad comes from one of these bloodlines, correct?
That's right. He claimed that he was the illegitimate son of a senator in Utah before Senator Hatch. And I did the research on that, and we took a picture of him, and my dad took the picture of him at the same age of the senator, and it looked like the same person. So I had no trouble believing that. I also had no trouble believing that that's maybe why our family was targeted. And my dad's IQ was off the charts. He was right there at Andrews Air Force Base, where Operation Paperclip scientists were being fed in directly to Andrews Air Force Base. When you do the research, you'll find that. And he was there from 1945 to 1948.
And he was a CIA operative and your immediate handler.
Yes, that's the way it works.
Deeply involved in child pornography.
Yes, he created kitty porn is what they call it.
Kitty porn.
And my sister April remembers us going to a house, again, a white house, interesting, and by some railroad tracks. And a woman would always be there. She said, we hated her. We hated her. And she would make us dress up into these costumes. And these costumes were like negligees for little bitty girls, and wedding dresses, and whatever would serve the interests of these sickos who had become so perverted that they were past feeling that they needed some kind of perversion so horrific that doing these evil things is the only thing that makes them feel anything, is basically what my husband came to the conclusion of as he has studied this along with me, because I kept on asking, why do they do this? What is wrong with these people? You know, my husband has a PhD in clinical psychology, so I've had a lot of questions for him over the years. And
now I pulled up, because of our first interview when you had talked about the green bomb speech, I pulled that up and ran a copy off. And one of the things that he was asked is why? What's the purpose? And so his answer was, my best guess is that the purpose is that of they want to create an army of Manchurian candidates, tens of thousands of mental robots who will do prostitution, child pornography, smuggle drugs, engage in international arms smuggling, do snuff films, and all sorts of very lucrative things that will do their bidding. And eventually the megalomaniacs at the top believe they'll create a satanic order that will rule the world. And one thing I would add to that, based on the research that I've done, would be create honeypots for blackmail. This
Oh,
is
yeah.
how they get collusion from different senators and people in particular positions of power that may not be of a particular bloodline and may not be so willing to consciously choose into the game, as it were, but they're
That's right.
blackmailed. They're
That's right.
blackmailed into it.
Yes, and if you want your children to be famous, if you would like your children to be famous, all you have to do is do what they want you to do. And then you can get a son that can become a big athlete if he's got a propensity. There's lots of competition. So how do you rise to the top? How do you become a big famous actor or actress? How do you win beauty pageants? This is terrible things when I'm realizing, I'm going, oh my gosh, I was groomed all the way up through my life to be a
Yeah.
country western music star. They had a guy named John Fisher call me and say, I'm basically here. I'm your new handler, you know, and I can, you know, offer you, I've got people waiting in line to spend all the money we need to get you up and going. And I says, well, I just want to ask you a few questions. I said, who did you manage before this? He says, oh, the Eagles, George Strait, Travis Tritt. He just went on and on his, you know, history.
Yeah.
And I said, well, have you ever used drugs? He says, oh yeah. I mean, that's just what this business is all about. But I did get into trouble. I had problems with that. And, you know, he kind of confessed to me some things and I just didn't like his vibe. And I actually turned him down. Oh, it was hilarious. At the time, my reasoning was that I was worried about my marriage because I knew something was wrong. I didn't know the things that I know now about my husband, but I'm just
Now, at the
that I'm trying
time,
to save that marriage.
you guys were
Hilarious.
top LDS singing artists. You
Yeah.
cut 17 CDs and you were at the top of the LDS artist game, even winning awards, correct?
Yeah, they gave me like the Grammy, the Favorite Female Vocalist Award. And I'm sure they would love to yank that back from me as I come out and speak these truths. However, you know, I don't know. I mean, you have to wonder, you know, what did my dad possibly do for that? I don't know.
Now let's talk about the CIA connection with Nabisco, where your father worked. And then we already established that your dad was your immediate handler, but he answered to Paul H. Dunn, which was over your programming, correct?
Yes, at one point, I think he did. I think also that he could have been answering to people like Spencer W. Kimball, who showed up, you know, at the temple on that fateful day.
Which we're going to
And
talk about,
yes,
listeners.
and I think who also had a big, you know, key part in my brother not going on a mission, but instead going out with Paul H. Dunn and doing all these many firesides for 5,000 plus people at a time. I mean, he did that for years. And Paul H. Dunn, you know, even the church, he was a throwback when he was found to have lied with his storytelling. It wasn't anywhere
That's a nice
remotely
way of calling him a
connected.
liar.
You can borrow other people's stories. Let's say that. And then the other people that said, that's my story. And you're telling my story. Anyway, yes, he was put on the shelf as a emeritus general authority. But anyway, yes, these people can't get away with this stuff. They may fool the people part of the time. But I will tell you one thing, as soon as that happened, he was immediately dismissed as a general authority. And there were a lot of questions from the faithful about Paul H. Dunn.
You know what? They threw him under the bus because in reality, they're all lying. And they
Well,
know it, but they have to have a sacrificial lamb when the spotlight turns to them so that under the umbrella of righteousness, they can say, well, we can't stand for that. So,
oh, yes.
you
Yes.
know, so
He did the same thing with my father when he was put into prison.
yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm sure he was the loyal little robot following and doing. And, you know, he had kind
Let's
of
talk
gone
about the events up to that. What led to
yeah.
him going to prison?
Oh, I'm going to go back earlier. I'm going to start with my father being left on a chicken farm when he was a very young child. His mother had abandoned him. And according to my father, she had molested him sexually. And she had been given fur coats and was dating a politician. and he's the one who ended up becoming the senator. And so even his own father abandoned him, didn't want anything to do with him. My grandmother's second family had very little to do with him. And he was left to be with the genealogist of the family, who only had sex with my grandmother when they were going to have a child. That
was the rule of thumb back then.
Being.
Yeah, that was the rule of thumb.
She left him and said, forget this. And anyway, my poor dad, he ended up digging a hole, putting the chickens in them, and burning it because he had been left alone for 6 years. And when he joined the army, he said he was taken care of and fed 3 meals a day for the first time in his life. So that tells you how it felt like he had come home, you know, to some kind of
brotherhood.
He joined the military just because they fed him. So I feel sorry for my father. He was abandoned by his real father. He was abandoned by the father that raised him to go off and be, you know, leave him when he was very young. And I visited that place, and it just was the creepiest, most horrible place. So that's my father. And so he was a Manchurian's candidate because he was extremely loyal to the military. He was so grateful to them that he would, you know, everything military, it would make him cry. Any songs, you know, America the Beautiful. Oh my gosh, you would hardly ever see him cry at anything, but that was just what he believed in. And then you added that to the church, the Mormon church, and all that brainwashing, and never to question authority, and always bow your head and say, what? Even though we have free agency, they tell you what to say right there. Say yes.
Yeah, which is why the military, the CIA, they choose organizations like Mormonism, Jehovah Witness, the Amish, because of their obedience.
Yeah, they're already used to bowing their head and saying yes to authority. And they don't believe that God would ever lead any of them astray. You know, maybe all the other Goyim, but not them, because they have been adopted into the house of Israel. Now, never mind that being adopted into the house of Israel means nothing to your handlers. You're either bloodline or you're not bloodline. And that's really hilarious because their bloodline is literally Khazarian bloodline. It's not even Jewish. They're not even Semites, but they claim the Jewish. Going back in history, they were offered, when they were kicked out of these countries, they were offered to be Christian, Jewish, or Muslim.
Muslim, yeah.
Jewish. And they basically overtook the Jewish religion and wore that as the, wolves in sheep's clothing.
Right. This is where we get crypto Jews. They're not Hebraic at all. So when people use the word,
and they don't even believe in God, but they do believe, right? They do believe, Madeline, that God has given them Israel. That's the one thing.
When there's no claim. There's no claim whatsoever. When people use the word Semite or anti-Semite, and I'm like, you don't even fucking know what that means. Stop using that word.
It's ridiculous because they're not Jews, and this is a very small group of people. And it just makes my skin.
Bloodlines are important, and I've talked about that with my viewers before in the baby naming video. I let them know when you bless your baby and you give it a name by which they will be known on the church records, that's the exoteric reason. But the esoteric reason, the inner knowledge, is because they're tracking bloodlines, and nobody does it better. Nobody
does it better. And
Mormon.
The reason they do that is hidden from most members of the church. It's being told that they're righteous, and are you related to the kings and queens of Europe? What they're really trying to do is find out what your bloodline is, because if you are related to some light-bearing lineage, they want to snatch you early on. They want you to stick you into some kind of satanic mind control program of some kind. They want to make sure that they have control of your life. They want to groom you into becoming a media person. They want to groom you into becoming something out in front of the camera. They want to groom you into something they can use so that they can further their agenda, and take your talents and everything with which you have been blessed to, rule and reign with blood and horror on the earth is really what it boils down to. And Mormons are absolutely blind to this. They do not care about,
Mm-mm.
they just tell you that you're adopted into the house of Israel, which means nothing because it's only about their bloodline. Their bloodline
Yeah.
will rule and reign. Their bloodline is Zionism. And
Yes.
everything else that's taught is basically, if you do not have that bloodline, and the Mormons, they get all excited about Jews. Oh, Jewish bloodline, the real Jews, the ones who aren't just like us, who are adopted. But I mean, when you study these people and what they're all about,
Mm-hmm.
oh my heck, they wouldn't drink each other's, it's all about the blood of the animal,
Agree.
which they
Yeah.
consider that we are nothing more than is animals. Yes. So,
Absolutely. Let's go back to your earliest memory of being programmed. You had talked about the red settee and the injections that you would get. So let's talk about your memories with that, and then
okay.
the purpose for, because I want to hit that. And I also want to talk about the incident that happened in the Mormon church with the ladies preparing you for the sexual abuse. And then a little bit later on, I think that's going to prepare us for the big whopper.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah, which is the sacrifice inside the LDS temple. So that's kind of where I'd like to lead things here.
Okay. Well, first of all, my mother had a very favorite best friend, and her name was Alice Nelson. And she just happened to be the sister to Spencer W. Kimball. She was the visiting teacher when my mom had baby after baby because she was a breeder for the program. She, because of her genetic lineage and my father's genetic lineage,
13.
13 children, which is a very interesting number
It
for my
is.
parents. 10 girls and 3 boys. Yes.
Mm.
Well, because of that, Alice Nelson, Spencer Kimball, was kind of part of our lives. I remember seeing him 6 different times personally, and he would come up to me and hug me and whisper in my ear with his little voice that could hardly speak and say, "I love you. I love you." And so I thought, oh, he loves me, but how does he know me? It was kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because they do have mind wipe technology, and I don't know what happened to my life before a certain time. I simply do not remember anything before I was 4 years old. And when you consider that a lot of these things happen really early on,
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of weird that I don't remember my first 4 years. The first time I remember myself, okay, at age 4 was when we had visited my grandpa in Arizona. My mom hated him. And but we went visiting there for some reason, and I remember making friends with my grandpa and heart connecting with him and screaming and crying and saying, "Please, grandpa, please don't make me go home. Let me stay here, grandpa, let me stay here." I mean, that's all I remember. That's my first memory in this life. Okay.
That's pretty traumatic right there.
Yeah, it's awful. Now, the next thing was, let's just skip me past all my sister's testimony, the 20 years I spent denying it, Kathy O'Brien, and let's get me to age 50, where I am working with my husband, who is a PhD in clinical psychology, and we're trying to unearth some memories. And it just so happened, we happened to have a healer who was literally an angel on this earth that was staying with us, who's also one of my husband's many illustrious clients. People come to him from all over the world because he does only what he does. And I had just had a major body work done with another client of Dean's who was a chiropractor. And so things were ready to move in my body. The memory, I had been praying that this would happen. I had had a woman who was an intuitive tell me that I would recover my memories within 2 weeks. This was right there a week after that. So it was all preparing me for what was coming, what I had been preparing for. If my sisters can tell me all these things, so many sisters with so many stories, then how come I can't remember? And so here it came. Oh dear. So the memory was, but I was really tiny. I was maybe 5 or 6, just really young. And I was on a little food cart, the kind that you would serve food on in the Relief Society. And the women there were preparing me with oils or whatever they were, and they were enjoying what they were doing. It was like, oh, and they'd whisper to me and gentle touches and saying how they are I was so special that I would be chosen, called and chosen to be, you know, used in this way for the priesthood, and that what was going to happen might hurt a little bit, but it was okay, you know, but, you know, it's okay to cry. It's a, you know, all of that, preparing me for what was coming. And the next thing I knew is that men were surrounding me, and that they were people and faces that I knew. These were beloved, you know, people that belonged to my church, that were the leaders. And because upon the first entry, you know, I was screaming so badly that.
And you're talking penetration entry.
Yes, that I had no choice but to dissociate. And when that happened, you've read books like Go Toward the Light or whatever, that people are hovering above their body. Well, that's what happened to me. And I was looking down on what was happening to me. And, you know, the men were sodomizing me and using me with great enjoyment, some of them. And I was able to go into their minds, and don't ask me how, because, you know, I've never had this ability before or since that I remember. But one of the men, you know, seemed to be concerned that, you know, as he was waiting for his turn, that he hoped that the bishop who was present would recognize his presence there and remember him next time he chose counselors, you know, as he took his turn. And then it was his turn. And I'm just, you know, this was a lot for a little girl. But as I looked back on this, and as I was remembering what was going on in these demented people's minds, you know, I got to see who these people are. And they're scared. They're scared people. They know that what they're doing is evil, and they are afraid of being found out worse than anything. They cover each other's butts out in the world.
Do you remember any names from that first incident, or that first incident that you remember?
I remember faces mostly, and the name of the one person that I do remember, the one who I thought I was actually close to, was my dentist at the time. And I prefer not to mention names.
Okay.
But it's interesting because that same person followed my career, and my dad said, do you remember him? Do you remember him? And pulled me back, you know, behind the stage, you know, when the Sounds of Freedom that April and I belonged to at BYU went to visit their little tiny town again. And it was our homecoming, you know, and there he was again, you know, and taking my hand and wanting to be close, and congratulations. And I just, and I guess he loved me as a child. I mean, that's just creepy. As I look back, I have a picture of him during that incident. It was just like, yikes, you know. So anyway, yeah, and the dentists, you know, are a part of this. Some of them are a part of this because they, you know, put the stuff in your teeth. And, you know, back then they were, and, you know, I mean, today for all the dentists to be fired if they tell the truth about fluoride, that's got to tell you about how these societies, the AMA, the dental associations, the psychological associations, as soon as you step out of line, they yank your license. Now, my husband, bless his heart, saw that coming and never, you know, joined. And so that,
which is great, because then they can't lord that over him.
Well, God has a plan, and, you know, anyone who wants to call me crazy, you know, might have to deal with
to be
the fact that my husband's never mentioned mental illness to me. He's just told me that I'm the brightest spirit he's ever met, and he kind of likes me, you know, except for when I wear my tinfoil hat.
But well, you know what, though, to be sane in an insane world looks crazy.
Well, but yeah, really, that reminds me of that sentence that said, to be well adjusted, there is no merit in being well adjusted to a sick society. I don't think that's the exact words, but that's the gist of it. So yeah, have I been really pissed off when I found out what was going on? When I saw the light being stolen from my sisters, when I saw my poor sister Dawn be put into a Catholic convent for, you know, speaking her truth early on, and for Priscilla, who was, you know, taken into the bathroom from the time she was born by my father, to split her off, and all of us heard her screams. We as children knew something terrible was going on, but we were patronized and told that her screams were just her trying to breathe, and she had breathing problems. Well, you'd have breathing problems too if, you know, your dad's penis was being shoved down your throat as a baby. And this is what they do to dissociate these children in the satanic families so that they can be used like their parents in these robotic manners. And these are the people who claim, who want this kiddie porn so that they can feel anything. And they love to choose people who are past feeling, who are so broken by the time they were, you know, little children, that they are very happy to just go along, get a paycheck, you know, raise their families in the Mormon church, their CIA, their FBI, they do everything. And this is the sad twist, is they do everything for God and country. And if they're running drugs in the CIA and the Mormon church, they're told that they're doing it for a sting operation. On the other end, everything is compartmentalized, so they don't know they're part of this evil.
Right.
And it's really horrible. So they were trying to get rid of Dawn and Priscilla because they couldn't be shut down. And in 1972, my father got an assignment from the priesthood to be the bishop for that special solemn assembly in 1972, in October of 1972. And all of us children were going to be in the children's choir. And what we were being set up for was that two of my sisters, Dawn and Priscilla, were going to be made the sacrificial lambs during the solemn assembly. And I guess my dad had a change of heart and said, April, Wanda, you know, get down there and go grab your sisters, go find them. And so we ran down the hall. We heard their screams. We were there at the door, and Dawn was under this little settee in the temple, and she was trying to hide. And
this is the Salt Lake Temple.
Yes, this is Salt Lake Temple.
Okay.
And we had to travel 10 hours to get there from Santa Maria, California. And then Priscilla was laid down on the altar, and the man with the jeweled dagger was just about ready to, you know, it was still dripping from the blood from the baby that they had just taken from the mother's womb. And
so they had already extracted a baby.
Yes.
They had already killed a baby and sacrificed this baby on an altar at the bottom of the Salt Lake Temple.
Yes.
And your sister was on the altar next.
Yes, she was just being laid down after, and, you know, yeah. And once you hear 50 more of these stories, it starts to become somewhat plausible that they do these crazy sounding things so that nobody will believe anybody ever.
Are you okay with naming the man that was holding the
Yes, it was the first man that, it was the first, I'm gonna tell a story before I tell the man.
Okay.
He was a bishop in the Southern California area, which is where I lived. And when I first heard his name, that he was nefarious, I had not left the church yet. I was invited to a fireside chat, and this woman came, and she said that he was her bishop, and that she had been married for 2 weeks, and that this man was asking her all kinds of sexual questions about her new marriage and everything. She could see that he was getting turned on, and he leaned over and he grabbed her and he tried to forcibly rape her. And she named him as President Thomas Monson. Now, I had not left. All I knew is that she was telling the truth, because I've got a truth-ometer inside of me and a bullshit shit-ometer. And I knew she was telling me the truth.
You're an empath.
It was a lot.
You're an empath, yeah.
Yeah. So Whew, I sat with that one for 20 years during an entire singing career, and yet watched that and read and studied and hoped that I was wrong. Just put it that way, because it was very inconvenient for me. That was my paycheck. That was I just had to set that on the shelf as maybe, possibly, but oh my gosh, what do I do with that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just amazing how far that, programming goes. You just keep going along to get along, bow your head, and you just do what the authorities tell you to do, and you don't question. And that was all my programming. So, it is amazing how long it took me to wake up to that one. But when Dawn and April and Priscilla, all three of them, told me this, it was impossible for me to ignore. That yes, indeed, that was Thomas S. Monson. That yes, indeed, that they rise as CEOs of their corporations to become a part of this corporation, and that at any corporation has to serve the bottom line first legally.
Yes.
That people are put later, last. It's all about the bottom line. If you've been a CEO, of course you'd be called to be a general authority. And Thomas Monson was all of that. So if you look him up, you'll see he was a CEO of his.
I have a YouTube coming out shortly called LDS Prophets, or Prophets with an F-I-T-S.
Profits. Well, there's a story about Hinckley. My girlfriend was told.
Hold on just a second. If we can, for the listener's sake, what I'd like to do is go back and finish. Dawn was on the altar.
No.
President Monson. Priscilla was on the altar, and President Monson, who was not president at the time, was ready to plunge his bejeweled dagger into her. How did she escape? How did you guys escape?
Well, we were struck with fear at the door, knowing that we shouldn't be in there. Okay, but there's our sisters. What are you going to do? At one point, you grab a sister. And April, apparently, in her book, she says, these are my sisters and you can't have them. And, we were passing footballs, young sisters, and, hightailing it out of the room. I grabbed Dawn, she grabbed Priscilla. We ran out of there. We ran all the way down to the end of the hall. There were sconces on the hall. There was bullets being whizzed past our head.
They were shooting at you.
Yes. And April says one of the people at the end of the hall was Paul H. Dunn with Spencer W. Kimball. And he said, stop it. They've had enough. Like he knew what was going on. So apparently they hypnotized us. They put us in the elevator and we went up. Now, Dawn remembers the elevator. She remembers everything, which is why she became such a problem later on.
Yeah.
And she was gang raped. She was raped by my brother and my father. In fact, there was a terrible fight over who was going to sleep with her. And she ended up, instead of a Mormon foster home, which is where my parents should have taken her, they took her to Los Angeles, 3.5 hours away from Santa Maria, California. And they put her in a Catholic convent with bars on the windows and doors. And when April and I finally went to visit her, we were allowed to. Her affect was flat. She seemed to have no emotion. We couldn't find her. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Where is my sister? And what have you done with her? And it was horrifying she talked about the right to remain silent, just like Kathy O'Brien's book. She had a little rose necklace that they had given her in one of these ceremonies, one of these rituals.
Representative of the Rosicrucian. So you have to know your symbolism. And this is one thing that I'm always talking to my viewers about. You have got to be symbol literate, because a rose necklace is not just a rose necklace.
Right. That's right. And she was finally sent back. But I asked my mom years later when I was putting these pieces together, and I said, Mom, please, why? When there was a foster system in the church in place at that time, why did you send her there? And she says, because the bishop told us to. And I thought that was really, really fishy. And I kind of bawled her out at that point. And this is what my mom would do. when I would go after her, she would say, "We did the best we could." And da, da, da. Now, there was a moment when I saw her and my dad in the hall, and I was in the bathroom behind the door. They couldn't see me, but I could see them, and they were hush hush, and they were saying, "Oh, people like us," and getting caught. And it was a conversation they were having about people like us and fear over getting caught. And I'm thinking, what are they afraid of? Why are they worried about getting caught? Getting caught doing what? And, you know, there was another little piece there. I mean, there's so many pieces that I was able to put together when I did this testimony, that, you know, things you take off the shelf that finally have a place to fit now.
Do you think maybe she was referring to the kiddie porn that you?
It could easily have been that. It could have easily been that both my mother and my father were involved. Some of my sisters claimed that they were in bed with both my father and my mother, and that sexual activity was going on, and that there would be pillows put over their heads to dissociate them for a specific amount of time, I guess. When I was baptized, when I was 8 years old, I remember my father making it a point to tell me that the man baptizing me had a ring on his finger representing the Freemasons, and basically telling me, this is a big gun in our town. You're going to get, you know, whoa. Because anyway.
So you were not baptized by your father, this Freemasonic member?
He was part of the whole thing. I was baptized by my father, but he let me know that he was in the room, that he was, you know, all part of it. He was a big gun at my baptism.
So he was witnessing your initiation.
He was witnessing my initiation. He wanted me to be proud of that. And years later, this is the same guy that was a big celebrity in our town. He was a wizard, a magician. And he made all of the Cumming sisters disappear on stage, and he made me elevate or levitate. And he had been on the Michael Douglas show. He had done, I mean, I have a picture of him with Tony Curtis, and he was with the Really Big Shoe. Remember that guy who did the Beatles? He had the Beatles on his show, and I remember that far back. It was
Is this the 70s?
Yes.
Okay.
And anyway, he was on, you know, some very big TV shows. So apparently what I've learned about the system is that they put their people in, who are their, what do you call them?
Covens?
Pied Pipers.
Oh, okay.
People with the ability to lead others. They want to make sure that they're handled and led into these Hollywood, you know, roles as famous stars or whatever. Or if you're a satanic family, you can, you know, do whatever it takes to get your child into these. Maybe the child has nothing to do knowingly that they're a part of a satanic family. I mean, they do the best they can. They even do crazy things like take the DNA from one sister and impregnate another sister, so that if anything does get, you know, birth records and everything could get all mixed up. And they do just really wild, bizarre things as you go into the research. That's exactly, by the way, my sister's testimony, that I was the DNA that they wanted, and that she was the breeder, and that they put my DNA in her. Weird stuff.
I had a client years ago that was an MKULTRA victim through the military. They started on her when she was 11 months old. And she was first being used as a breeder when she was 13. She was impregnated using somebody else's ovaries because of her youth. And then as she turned 14, the second time she had a baby, and this caused her great distress because they will induce the labor early.
Very early.
This is not a regular fetus with a regular spiritual consciousness that's come in. These are done under rituals. So the vibrational frequency of these spirits that take hold of these little babies are not like you and I. And then they're used for sacrificial purposes. And I had to explain that to this woman several times because it just kind of depended on which personality we were dealing with at the time. But most of them recalled being used as a breeder several times. And we had to go over the fact that, look, this is not a normal consciousness. This is a demonic evil spirit that they ritualistically bring in to inhabit this baby, and then they offer it up to their Luciferian gods. And as crazy as that might sound, this is not what we do as normal people. This is what they do.
Yeah.
These are their...
Well, and their God is not Jesus Christ or the Father of Jesus Christ. It's not anything the Mormons think it is, or any other churches that have been infiltrated by these demons through the Freemasons that basically hijack their churches. Their God is Baal, Baal.
Yes.
All kinds of different names. And they think of him as their guy, you know?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we have talked about Baal so many times in my videos and how he goes under different names. They take on different personas depending on the culture and the time period and the religion and so forth. But let's go back to...
And also, let's not brush past the soft cannibalism that you and I both independently came to the conclusion of with their sacrament. It's like, okay, sacrifice brings forth the blessings of heaven. Now just take this thing, and it might even turn into flesh in your mouth, you know, if you're Catholic, but it's the bread of, you know, and it turns out to be soft cannibalism. It's supposed to be represent the flesh of Christ, making sure Christ is dead, because the Protocols of Zion has as number 14, we shall forbid Christ. And this is right in the learned elders of the Protocols of Zion. You know, all of the stuff that the Mormon church is based on is this Freemason bullshit around how they shall forbid Christ. And if you can't really take a look at this straight up, you're never going to get the truth of this, because it's right there in the Protocols of Zion. And that is, we shall forbid Christ. Anyway, in the Christ in you, the Christ in me, anyone showing up as a light being that might claim that, whatever, you know, I wonder when he comes again, you know, he wouldn't be accepted.
No, he wouldn't be recognized.
No, you know, the whole point is to shut that program of light down early on in all of the children, as many as they can get a hold of. And that's what this program is all about. And that's why they have ruled and reigned with blood and horror on this earth. And the children's blood is crying from the ground. And I know you've heard it, and I know I have. It's time it stops.
And I agree. And that's why we're doing this interview, is because we have to shed light on this situation. And you were just going to mention, before I redirected us, you were just going to mention having your ovaries or the eggs.
Yes.
So let's go back and revisit that.
Going back to this big, huge room. It was an underground DUMB facility, which is called a deep underground military base. For those who are not familiar with that, please look it up. They're all over the place. There's like an ant. If you look at an ant farm under a brick or something, you see all the little things underground. That's what's going on here. They have all of these military underground bases. And a lot of experimentation goes on with us. Military children get experimented on because, anyway, that's another rabbit hole. But blind, you know, consent, you know, basically from their parents is what it boils down to. Well, April and I found ourselves down in one of these deep underground military bases. There were a lot of people with white coats, and they would come at us with these big, huge syringes. And I remember this red settee in the middle of this huge room, and the fear that we would feel as they would come after us with these big hypodermic needles. I hated them. They were repeated over and over and over again. And I remember saying, April, you run this way. I'll run this way. And we would run because we were Paul Cummings sisters, you know, and we were good at it. And they would always catch us. And they would always make it hurt if we ran away, so that we would be discouraged from running away again. and they would put the electrodes on our private parts and reward us for when we did or said whatever they wanted, and, you know, punish us severely through the shocks and the stuff that they would do.
You know, not everybody lives through their torture.
No.
You know that. You are blessed to be alive for a higher purpose.
I know that. And April said that my sisters would follow my lead because of my iron will. That was in her book. And she said she would I would sometimes, you know, just say, you know, do this to me, but leave her alone, you know, like I'm used to it kind of thing. Or maybe I can leave my body right now. What if they can't leave their body and they have to feel it kind of thing, and try to protect our younger sisters. And when they would bring a new sister in, you know, just horrible. And so the thing is they would want us to be separate, to have our little squabbles, to maintain our compartmentalization away from each other. What they never counted on was that I loved my sister so much that I became their therapist. They were always coming to me with their stories. And, you know, we might have, you know, outs over the years, but one thing we all agree on is that that did happen in the Salt Lake City Temple. And that we went up and sang in the choir, and Doug Brinchley, you know, led us in the choir. He also traveled that 10-hour trip from Santa Maria. He was my high school choir director and Mormon. And I remember singing, and the Columbine were bending their heads in the rain. You know, I remember that little song that they taught us. I remember all kinds of things surrounding it, but they somehow, apparently they have, and you read the stuff about their technology that is well beyond ours. They have something called mind wipes that they use frequently for the SRA victims, especially because they don't want them remembering these things. But there's a percentage of us that remember, and then we become troublesome. At one point, April, who remembers everything, and her whole life was a hell because of it, she would little by little try to feed it to me and let me know. And when you first hear it, it's just too crazy.
It's mind-blowing.
Get around a baby being eaten by the priesthood, you know, that just doesn't go over too well, especially when you're a Mormon singing star, which I was. You know, it was very inconvenient. But after hearing Kathy O'Brien's testimony, I had already had one foot out the door. And I was already asking questions that were way too hard for anybody to answer to me, because it was starting to become bullshit. This business is about God's ways or not my ways, you know, and I'm thinking, what about 26,000, you know, people that Moses was asked to kill and give the virgins to the priests and, you know, turn their heads, cut their heads off, put them on sticks, turn them upside down to assuage this God's wrath? And I'm thinking, that's not my God.
It's not my God, right?
Baal, that might be an SRA God, an evil son of a gun, but it's not somebody that I would accept as the God of love that would ever do that to his children, or claim that one group of chosen people, you know, needs to have a war with another group of chosen people until you figure out that war has always been used by these people that want to make money on both sides of the wars.
Yes.
And who else but bankers to do that? And that was proven with the War of 1812 and the Bowers, or who became the Rothschilds. That same family has been doing it ever since. It's never stopped. Every war that you see going on around is being treated in the same way. They're just money makers.
There's no money in peace.
Oh, no.
And that's what it boils down to.
Halliburton, just do the research on Halliburton and find out, you know, it's Dick Cheney's company, and find out how much he personally benefited off of the war in Iraq. It's disgusting when you start going down these rabbit holes and doing your own research. And it was funny. I was on a Mormon Stories podcast, and I did this. I posted my tribunal testimony, and a troll came on and says, "Do your research. It's the Kool-Aid or something. What do you say, for anybody who is wearing a tinfoil hat?" And I'm thinking, okay, I'm obviously talking to a troll who doesn't want people to do their own research. Why would that be? Well, it turns out it ends up being a family member who, along with his sister, wanted to protect the name of their father, who is now dead. And, you know, of course, she was calling me crazy. And that I'd refused treatment. And
that's easier than realizing that you're talking the truth. Because
well,
if you speak
it's
the truth,
just killing the messenger. And that's what happens to truth tellers. They love to kill the messenger, and they've gotten away with it for thousands of years. The only problem is that people are becoming awake now. The light is flooding the planet. People know something is wrong. When 2,200 people can march on Salt Lake City and they can bring testimonies, and the general authorities won't even come out of their building and, out of respect, honor these victims and say, with tears in their eyes maybe, I am so sorry. But they could not bring themselves to do that, and sent a pencil pusher and somebody else's pencil pusher down there to accept it with plastic smiles. And that is a tribute to their guilt. And I am sorry, but that is the truth. These men are not who you think they are. They just aren't.
they're not. And so on the topic of protectlDSchildren.com, and Sam has done tremendous work. I wish I had known about it, because I separated myself from the post-ex-Mormon world.
I did too, for many, many years. I was kind of drug into it.
Yeah. I feel the same way, but that's okay, because this movement needs people to shine a light on the darkness. So what would you say is one of the greatest things we can do to protect our LDS children? Not that I'm LDS anymore. However, I still have great compassion for the suffering and the brainwashing that is going on, and the fact that these children are just the next generation to come through the program. What can we do to help them?
Well, get out of the church, for one thing. Don't give your tithing and all your talents to something when your talents belong to you. And that's money that you could be used to serve humanity. What's going on with your tithing is that it's being invested in the New York Stock Exchange. Billions has been revealed now about what the church is doing with its money. And it's not what you think it is. All you have to do is just do a little research, and you'll find out. And it may break your heart. It did break mine. I was really, really torn up inside when I realized what I had given all my talents to. Right. I was a Mormon singing star. I believed every word I said at every fireside. And I, gave my all to it, my 1,000%. And even when I was still coming out and I was doing the Mormon radio show, I was starting to interview people. I remember how the Mormons started to turn on me when I would bring people from other religions to interview them about what they believe. Just like, what's wrong with that? Isn't that what Joseph Smith himself told us to do, is, get together and see what we have in common versus creating wars, religious wars. But religious wars are very profitable.
They are.
And saying I'm the only true church and my God is better than your God is very profitable. The Muslims are way up into it right now, and that's not going to do humanity any good. So my best advice to protect your children is to not let them be near any high up priesthood leader ever, for any reason, and certainly not behind closed doors. There have been too many testimonies out there. There's too much shaming going on for their sexuality. And the point of that, and I hate to be blunt, is just tithing.
Do it.
Sinful people are the best tithing payers. And if they've masturbated, oh my gosh, it starts early and it never ends. Of course, they're going to go to the MTC if they felt up their future wife or husband, and let's get out of, oh my gosh, it's horrible what they do to these kids, and, shame them. And so many are committing suicide. It's just outrageous. This has to stop. Apparently they are now stopping it. Apparently they're not going to ask about masturbation anymore, which
really,
I just heard that. I just read it on the Mormon podcast stories. You can
wow. See, I don't research on the different Mormon blogs or post blogs.
I don't either. I haven't
in general. So
my friend belonged to it and said, can I please post this? And I said, yeah, I guess, but oh dear, I don't know if they're ready. So of course I had the people coming out, a lot of people attacking. One woman said, well, I just know what went on with me. And she was very brave. Thank you, Luana Brown, who came out and said, I know what happened to me. And then another one said, and furthermore, I think it's time to stop blaming the victims here, you know, to the trolls, you know. And so I was defended quite
nice.
by my, you know, fellow conversationalists in that that blog. But you know, I'm not here because I care about what anybody thinks. Nobody does this, you know, because it's good for your health.
And it's not a popularity contest, because some of the comments that you get are really horrifying.
You know who these people are. And when you know that the energy is fear and force and manipulation and confusion and deception, which meaning lying, go ahead and lie about the person telling the truth, which is what they've done for thousands of years, you know, attack that person. And if there was mental illness in the family, then they can be deemed as unreliable just because of their mother having mental illness, or, you know, it doesn't matter. But the victims have had enough of this crap. It's time for us to stand up together and with one voice speak our truth.
Amen.
Let our fellows, our for the sake of the children, tell the truth about these things that happen to you. Do not hold back anymore. It is not a time to hold back, because quite honestly, these things are going to come up anyway. We're going to, as the light comes on, we are going to become more clairaudient, more clairvoyant, more clairsentient, and we will be reading each other's minds with more readiness, and not a lot will be held back from anybody. So it's best to tell the truth now.
Right.
Be your own hero. Step forward. This has to happen.
It does. You know, I was, after we did the initial recording, I was talking to my husband about the interviews that they do with little children. And sometimes I guess I can still be in my programmed mind, and it takes a little while to get over all the different little layers. But I was mentioning that when I was in high school, and this was in the 80s, we had a bishop that I thought was really cool, because you didn't always have to go into the office and have an interview with him. He would pull up in his truck in the front of your house and then pop down the tailgate and then invite you to come sit and talk with him, and you would have your interview right there. So in my naivete, I told my husband, I was like, it was much more comfortable because, you know, it was out there in the open. And he was just, you know, not having grown up Mormon, he was shaking his head and he goes, how often did this happen? I said, oh, I don't know. He'd swing by every couple of months while he was bishop. And he said, did it ever occur to you that he was crushing on you or spending time with you or grooming you in a particular way? Because that's a lot to come by and visit a young girl in high school and just check in on you every few months. And I thought,
well, try this. That you got a really good point. Try this. You got a father telling his daughter, I am attracted to you. I wonder if, because my father was a pedophile, if I'm a pedophile too. Now, first of all, why would you ever do that? Why would you lay that heavy burden on tiny little shoulders? What is that little girl to do with that information?
it crushes the soul. It crushes the soul.
Well, that happened in my family, and I'm just kind of going, okay, you know, I wish I could just, you know, have a very serious talk with this person. He's no longer with us, you know.
As we wrap things up, can you tell us the quote that you had mentioned in the first interview regarding pedophilia in the lights in Salt Lake? Do you recall that?
Yes. My friend Sandy, who was on the Lawrence Welk show, the Sandy and Sally, dark, beautiful, beautiful, long red hair, and such a lovely, sweet girl and a personality. She became my friends. We did several concerts together at Bravenel Hall in Salt Lake City. And she checked in with me every once in a while. She stayed in the church, but she wasn't and isn't there with her eyes closed. And she leaned into me when I told her my story. And she said, I'm not discounting what you're saying. She said, my sister is a therapist in Salt Lake City. And she said, she told me that if there was the lights going out for every home where there's incest and abuse occurring, she said it'd be dark at night in Salt Lake City. So, you know,
It's
it's a very serious problem, incest, but we're not talking about, you know, somebody high up or somebody's, you know, religious leader or daddy, you know, putting his hands down, you know, Sally's panties. We're talking about a well crafted, created, generational program that creates these Manchurian candidate robots to do their bidding, to go along and get along, who will be given perks like their children being stars in Hollywood, like them having a high profile in the community, like them being, you know, a judge or a, you know, something that they can get bought off by. And it's all through these Freemason layers. Anything above 33rd is when they start being handed children to sacrifice to show their loyalty. And if the Dutch banker, Ronald Bernard, if you want to look at him, he was also a person that followed my testimony. He said he was a banker, and they did present him with the child. And it sickened him so badly. In fact, in spite of the fact that he had been groomed and nurtured all of his life for this high up calling as, you know, in the satanic church, he said he just could not do it. And he fell out of society, he got healed, and he came back at the end of my testimony. He says, it's true, they crossed the line, they killed these children, I have witnessed it. He says, but can you please forgive me? And if somebody wants to come back over the line, can you please have it in your heart to forgive them? And I said, of course. And his testimony gave me hope for my father, which I had never had. And Karina Hutzbout, who is one of the justices there, she works in Belgium with the worst of the worst on the planet, who have killed these children, who want to get out of this horrible system. And it feeds up to the royals, the elites, and their bloodlines. And once they realize that there's no saving them, if they get caught, they're out on the street. And they've seen it over and over again, because now there's this hysteria around, you know, finding these pedophiles and getting them off the streets. So now with this, a lot of them are now suddenly wanting to change. And we get to forgive them, and we get to appreciate who they are. But you know what? Just because we forgive them does not make them suddenly safe.
right.
For me, my father was no longer safe. I couldn't really have conversations with him anymore because I couldn't find his spirit. But my last invitation goes out to you, Dad. If you see this, Karina has offered her help to you, and she has 100% cure rate if you want to change. And that goes for anybody else who wants to change, who has found themselves on the other end of this horrific SRA. So that's all I want to say. And I finally got it out there. I won't be making any phone calls to my father.
And I say this with all honor. I just so appreciate your courage, and I appreciate your beautiful soul. This is not easy stuff. This is not easy stuff. And every time, I hope the listeners appreciate that every time you get into this topic, you get to different layers, and you do it on an emotional level. And it's like sometimes repouring salt in those wounds. And I hope to God they appreciate the sacrifice that you make every time you open up and share, because this is tough stuff.
And a lot of people think, oh, it's just a few people, there's not very many, but this is what the CIA, William Binney, has come up with, and Robert David Steele. They said the numbers are staggering and getting worse. This is growing like a mushroom. He said an ex-SRA priest that has come out of it has said in every stinky dinky little town, he says there's throngs of people from all of these churches that are all involved. He said the numbers would shock you. And he actually said it's between 8 and 11% of our society is involved in this. So it's people you know.
Teachers, lawyers, it doesn't matter. They're in every aspect of society you can imagine. They've infiltrated everything. Churches are no different. In fact, sometimes they're the worst. And if you've got children and they're involved with the Boy, Girl Scout, whatever they've decided to name it now, don't even get me started with that. But in all of those different auxiliaries with children, this is a hotbed for pedophiles. So watch your children. Do not trust anybody. Don't trust anybody.
That's it. That's it. If I had children, I couldn't let them out of my sight with what I know. And right now, I mean, I was raised to never question authority. Right. And now I never look at the places high up that this might be hiding, which is where it hides so well and why it's gone on for so long. But now it's the first place I look. People that are high up, I instantly ask myself, how did they get there? Who did they know? What did they do to get there? And should I trust them?
What's their bloodline too? I always go back and look at their bloodline, right?
Yeah. What's their
And people get into these nonsense arguments, Hillary, Trump, without even going back and doing the research and realizing they're cousins. They come from the same bloodline, so it doesn't effing matter. Get over it. So that's what it's all about, is the bloodline situation. So,
well, and you look at, Hillary, and you brought her up, but I mean, there is a dark web video. It is real. Robert David Steele from the CIA said it is real. And it's something that, people want to make fun of and say that it's tinfoil hat stuff. It's not.
It's not.
And when you follow the money on this, you are led directly that all of these human trafficking systems are going toward these child centers, the Shriners that do things for the children's hospitals. These are rife with it. All hospitals have some military function, I found out. I had no idea. A lot of experimentation goes on in hospitals. You're going to find out that 80% of the drugs that are out there in big pharma are opioids. They want to dumb us down and get us hooked and addicted on these drugs. And it's all about control. And there's a large segment of our society involved in it. And it's time for spirits to stand up and fight back with the light of truth. Even though short-term this is hard to hear, it's high time that we protect our children. These are our kids.
And you had mentioned before, I read this in Kathy, I don't know if I read it actually, or if I heard her say it in one of her interviews, but she had talked about the LDS warehouses, the food warehouses being used as drug running facilities. Can you say more on that?
Well, Kathy O'Brien just said it up front. She said she was in the country western music industry. And, they would stick it on the buses and send it on down the road. And if you're a policeman and you're a good guy and you happen to stop them, you're not going to go searching for, Tanya Tucker's, apparently it's just an easy way for them to do it. I had a comment that says, well, you had me till the country western. Everyone knows it's about the hooch and not the drugs. And my point was, look, it doesn't matter what your country road you're going down to. It's whether or not you can smuggle these things. And look, is anybody going to question a bishop's storehouse in the church? Wouldn't that, if you were a bad guy and had control and wouldn't that be the perfect place to hide these things? The drug smuggling, the gun smuggling, the money laundering. Wouldn't it be abso-freaking-lutely perfect? All you have to do is just put your thinking cap on and say, if I was a bad guy, wouldn't I make these rituals sound crazy so nobody would believe them, and hide behind the light so that nobody would question the authorities that they were taught to, in their heart, revere and
follow
next to Jesus Christ himself or God herself. I mean, this was unthinkable for most people. But of course that's what they would do, because these people are very, very smart. They've gotten away with it for thousands of years. Some people say there's no evidence. I'm just going, oh my gosh.
There's plenty of evidence. You don't want to look at it.
All you have to do is be willing to see it. And again, what did the old scripture say? Those who have ears to hear and those who have eyes to see. All you have to do is see it. And if you want evidence, go to the ITNJ and go to that portal where there is so much evidence. There's evidence on the human trafficking from the doctor who thought that he was doing surgery on a dead person, only to find out that that person had moved, and that he knew that in order to survive that, his next few minutes, he had to pretend that he didn't see the person move, and he had to finish what he was doing.
Which was organ harvesting.
Yeah. And this is going on with the people that meditate and don't get sick in China. They want their organs more than anybody else. It's big business, it's big money. It goes unchecked because this side doesn't know what this side is doing or where it came from. And it's horrific. The organs and glands are going from $72,000 to over $200,000 for the Falun Gong organs and glands because they are so healthy. This is outrageous.
That literally hurts my brain. Because
Planned Parenthood is actually doing this for money, and that's been caught now up in the court system. They have found that, and all these roads lead to the Clinton Foundation. And for those of you who voted for Clinton, I'm sorry, but just get some research done there too. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that the other guy's pure and holy, because he certainly isn't, but I really do appreciate his executive orders that is naming names, who are putting these people off the streets, who are getting them so that they can have their tribunal of justice. And it's happening now. And thank God it is. It's the only thing. Monson dying and President Trump coming in with these executive orders has given me the courage that I needed to come forward with my testimony.
I thank you so much for doing that. And I really, really hope that people take your testimony to heart. I hope they go to the ITNJ website and take a look.
International Tribunal of Natural Justice.
Yes.
The seating in London for human trafficking and sexual abuse. And there is mountains of evidence from highly credible sources there.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you will come back and visit with me again. I know you and I will be in touch. I just appreciate your beautiful soul.
Thank you. Me too, for you, Natalie.
And I appreciate your time. We had to do this twice. Well, actually, we got to do this twice because we got into so much more detail and got to so much more information.
So many synchronicities.
Absolutely. For you viewers out there, I thank you for joining us. As always, please feel free to write your comments. I'm going to ask you to be polite and provide resources. This is a very sensitive subject, so I'm going to ask you to have compassion. If you have an opposing view, you're going to do your homework and then please make a comment in a polite way. That's all we ask. We're here to open a dialogue. You can reach me at galacticstoryteller.com, and my email address is galacticstoryteller@gmail.com. As always, you guys take care, and we will see you in the next video.